couple of types of movements, and then there are others that can be several different types of movements. All right, so there are different types of joints also that are shown on this table, and we'll discuss actually in 3 different slides here. This is too little to see. This is the same. Those are the same slides. So plane or gliding joints, which are the examples of these joints. Plane or gliding joints are uniaxial joints. That means that they can make only one type of movement. They have some rotation. They can move a little bit. For example, this joint here, which is in our vertebral column. So they show some movement, and if the movement is shown, it is only in one direction. The 2 bones, which are very flat bones, they actually make that joint. Like, these 2 bones, they're almost flat, or these type of bones that articulate with each other and have very flat face. So those are plane or gliding joints. They can actually just glide. For example, the bones in our carpals are those kind of they make those kind of joints. Saddle joints are those that actually have biaxial type of movement. For example, 2 bones that articulate make this type of a shape in which one bone is convex and other bone is concave. So they actually can fit in on each other. So as if a rider is sitting on top of his saddle. So that rider can actually make movement front and back of the horse, and that can also make lateral movements on the back of the horse as well. So those type of joints are called saddle joints, as if a rider is sitting on top of a horseback. So again, the example in this case is the same example, intercarpal, thumb intercarpal. Actually, you can move your thumb left and right and up and down as well, but you cannot really rotate it freely around its axis. At least I cannot. So others probably can. Everybody's trying that now.
I can.
I can. So mine is biaxial. Yours may be actually multi-axial thumb.
Does it matter if I broke it before?
No, I think if it is not hurting now, that means it's healed, then it should be back to normal. I cannot move it. Okay, everybody else can try that. The third type of joint is called hinge joint. So those are like hinges. So the bones, there are these type of convex these cylinders which are kind of convex in shape that are protruded, and the other ones are concave in nature, just like we saw in case of previous case as well. So in this case, one bone is articulating against the other bone as if they are kind of fitting in each other, like this one here. So they are fitting in each other. This bone provides kind of a support, and other bone is the one which is the moving bone. So that articulation in which this type of movement takes place, the movement is still kind of uniaxial. It is still taking place in one direction, because it is a fixed structure, so it is moving only in this direction. It cannot move this way. It is moving only in this direction. So that is the example of the bone between humerus and ulna. And then pivot joints are those joints in which rotation takes place around a single axis. We've seen this before. An example in this case is radius and ulna, which are attached with the help of this ligament. So the movement in this case, which is very little, takes place around this single axis, as if this is completely attached and can move only in one direction, and also to a very small extent also. It cannot go at an angle of 360 or so. It's actually its rotation is very limited, because that's the example of radius and ulna again. And if you try it, you can actually move it to some extent. In this case, both of those bones are parallel. So if you are in this position, which is anatomical position, both of those bones are parallel to each other. When you rotate it, Now those bones are kind of crossing each other because it is still fixed here, in the elbow, but when you rotate only your wrist, so those bones are crossing each other. So that means that's the mobility that is given because of this pivot joints. So otherwise, if those are fixed, if there was no mobility in this joint between radius and ulna, you will not be able to rotate it. You know, you can actually move the whole thing, or you will not be able to move it. And another example in that case is the dents of axis and atlas. So which one is the top? These are the two vertebrae, right? These are the two vertebrae. Which one is the number one? Atlas is the number one. Axis is number two. So axis has that small process on the bone, which is a small kind of protrusion on which, pardon? Dents, that's right. Dents, which is present on the second vertebra of the vertebral column. So basically, your head bone sits on it, and it provides the rotation, which is when you rotate your head, it is sitting on that, and that rotation is the one. But it is still limited, right? You can move up to here and up to here, maybe 180 degrees or so. But if you try to rotate it, 360, something will happen, right? So some birds can do that, right? Some, like owls, they can actually rotate almost at a 360. They can actually take their neck all the way to their back. But they cannot rotate it, after that. They still have to come back this way. The fifth type of joints are called ball and socket type of joints. Those are more triaxial, and the example is this joint, which is the shoulder joint, and the hip joint is another example of example like that. So the ball is attached to some sort of a socket, if you remember that. So acetabulum, which is the where our femur is attached to, that joint is the one which is an example of ball and socket joint. Ball from here means those heads of the bones, femur and humerus. Both of those bones have those heads on the top, so those are the kind of roundish part of the bone, which is on their proximal ends of the bone. So they are attached in some sort of sockets that hold those balls very closely. Ellipsoids are very similar as ball and sockets. The only difference is, in this case, the shape of the ball is not exactly like a ball. It is more ellipsoidal. So what is the shape of ellipsoidal? What is ellipsoidal? So ellipsoidal is more like something like that. Not exactly egg-shaped, because eggs are a little different. Eggs are like that. So these are very uniform on both ends. So that ellipsoidal is an example of some joints in our body. Those are biaxial. They can move, left, right, up and down type of movement. One example which is given here is atlanto-occipital ones. So that's again that joins the cervical vertebra to the occipital bone of the head. We'll cover some of these. Actually, I think this is where probably we should just stop. Because some of these we will cover in our lab. Or let's take care of them here. Let's take care of them right here. Okay, so the types of movement. Gliding movement is when the two planes in a joint, they show slight movement. They're sliding on top of each other. So that movement which is seen in case of carpal bones is the gliding movement. Then angular movements could be several different types of movements. Those are at some sort of an angle. Flexion and extension, or abduction and adduction are those angular movements. We'll see actually in the next images. Then there are circular movements too. Like I gave the example of the shoulder joint. You can actually rotate it quite a bit, or you can go through a complete circle with those joints, which are called circumductions. Okay, these are the examples of flexion and extension. So actually, if you flex means is the movement of a body anterior to the coronal plane. So if you are an extension will be when you are extending your arm. When you flex it, when you contract your arm, that is an example of flexion. So contraction or flexion are similar things. So when you actually extend your arm, that is the extension itself. You are taking the part of the body to the posterior side. So it is in the anterior side and it goes to the posterior side now. That is flexion and extension. The other example given here is taking your foot, one foot, if you can do it with both feet, that's fine too. But if you can, when you actually move your leg on the back side, that is an example of flexion. So when you bring it back, then that is the example of extension. Because in extension, you are moving the part of the body toward the coronal plane, which is the main plane of the body. That is extension, and flexion is when you move it away from it. When you move the part of the body away from the coronal plane, that is called flexion. Again, the same examples. Other examples of flexion. When you actually extend it, when you do the extension more than it normally can, then that is called hyperextension. So for example, if you can move like the example given there, if you move your arm, your hand like that, this is extension, this is flexion, this is extension back to its normal, and when you actually extend it more than what it should, then that's called hyperextension. So that hyperextension, so now we are actually doing it here with the coronal plane. So when you move it toward the backward, this is anatomical position. When you're moving it to the front, that moving it to front is flexion. Moving it back to the coronal plane, which is the plane of the body, then that is extension. Then when you move it backward, away from where it normally is, that means you are doing it hyperextension at that time. Then there are some special types of flexion and extension which are called dorsiflexion and plantar flexion as well. So the dorsiflexion would be when you raise your foot or when you start walking on your heels. That is dorsiflexion. So if you walk like that on your heels, meaning that your feet are above, the only thing that is touching the ground are the heels. When you actually walk on your toes, that is an example of flexion which is based on plantar flexion. You're flexing your feet. You're flexing your feet at that time. So this would be example. If you can walk on your toes, that would be much better. I cannot. So that will be a plantar flexion. And dorsiflexion is actually when you are standing on your heels. When you're extending your feet above the ground. Abduction and adduction. Abduction is the movement away from the medial plane, or medial plane. So that is called abduction. So for example, your fingers like that, when you move them away from the median, which is this middle part, then that is called abduction. When you bring them back towards the medial side, then that is adduction. So this is adduction, abduction. And the other example of abduction and adduction is when you actually move your hand, your arm, away from the body. That is example of abduction. because you're moving it away from the median. And when you bring it back to the median, that is adduction. So it is coming back. Abduction is away, and adduction is towards. Then circular movements like rotations are turning of a structure on its axis. So for example, your arm, again, when you move your arm on its axis, like in case of lateral movement or medial rotation, then that is an example of rotation. So you can bring your arm toward the medial side, or you can actually take it away from the medial side of the body, away from the medium, away from the medium side is called lateral rotation, and towards the median is called medial rotation. So away and towards define the types of movements that are made. Either it is lateral or it's medial rotation. Then pronation and supination are the two which are related to prone position and supine position. So supine position is on your back, on your spine, and pronation is when you are basically face down. So, and those two positions are actually when you are in those positions, when you are in those anatomical positions, and when you rotate it away from there. For example, this is the supination position, which is anatomical position. When you move it to the backward, when you move this arm towards backward, that is here. So from here, if you actually move it backward like that, that is the pronation. When you move from here, if you move it back towards the front, that is called supination position. Circumduction is, if you kind of rotate, this is a combination of several different types of movement. And that is actually if you kind of go in a cone-like circulation, cone-like position, which is small here and much wider on the other side, that is called circumduction. If you rotate your arm, or if you can do the same thing with your leg too, then that is circumduction. And this is possible only on those joints which are ball and socket types of joints, which are free moving types of joints. Okay, now we are not going to cover this. Then these are some special types of movements, protraction and retraction. It is possible only in some joints of our body. Protraction is gliding movement which is done anteriorly. So when you actually extend your jaw in the front, that is protraction. You are kind of moving it forward more than normal. When you move it back, that is retraction. So it's retracted back to its normal position. And it's possible only in some bones of the body. This is another kind of weird type of movement which is also possible only with some joints of the body, which is lateral and medial type of movement. Lateral movement is when the mandibles move left and right. Not many actually joints can do that. And medial is when it is moved back towards the medial position of the mandible. Opposition and reposition is on those joints is the movement of thumb. This is also a special type of movement. So when the little finger and thumb move towards each other, that is called opposition. So they are going in the opposite direction to each other. That type of movement is called opposition, and when they go back to their normal position, that is called reposition. They are repositioned back to where they were. Inversions and eversions. Inversion is turning the angle so the plantar surface of the foot faces medially. So when you actually move it toward the internal side, the foot is like that. When you move it towards the medial side, kind of lifting the side on the lateral side up, that is called inversion, because you are inverting it. When you actually move it away from the medium, from the medial position, that is called eversion. So it is moving away from the median. Okay, I think that's where we're going to end this chapter. Not going to cover anything after this. So we will repeat some of these movements. If it is very clear, then probably will not really touch upon those again in the lab. If there is any confusion, then we'll talk about those. But other than that, we are done with this chapter.